This is Podcasting 101, an introduction to podcasting. Those ideas ain't doing anyone any good if they're just bouncing around in your head, you know what I mean? Chuck Fresh. So what is a podcast? Think of a podcast as an on-demand radio show. That's really all it is. They're typically audio only and provide talk and music content that you can stream or download over the internet. The bonus is you can play, start, stop, share, and repeat a podcast as many times as you want. And that's the flexibility that you could do a podcast that you can't do with radio. Podcasting, first known as audio blogging, I know it's a terrible name, has roots dating back to the 1980s. Radio Computing Services, RCS as they were known in the industry, as everything with an acronym is, provided music and talk shows to radio stations in a digital format known as multicast networks. These were used primarily by educational and research institutes, but audio talk programs also, when they snuck a couple in there. When broadband internet began to displace dial-up and portable digital audio playback devices such as the iPod hit the market, podcasting caught fire. Its current form was developed in about 2004 by former MTV VJ Adam Curry, believe it or not, and software developer Dave Weiner. They wrote a program that enabled people to automatically download internet radio broadcast to an iPod. Imagine that. Developers caught wind of this and improved upon the idea, and in mid-2005, iTunes came out with official support for podcasting, and podcasting was born. Today, there are more than 100,000 English language podcasts available on the internet, and millions of avid listeners, and dozens of websites available for distribution at little or no cost to the producer or listener, and that's fabulous. Many fired DJs and canceled radio shows can now be found as podcasts. So there's somebody you love listening to, chances are he or she is probably out there as a podcast, so check it out if you haven't. They ask us, are podcasts regulated? Well, right now, podcasting is free from government regulation. Podcasters do not need to buy a license to broadcast their programming like radio stations do. And they don't need to conform to FCC broadcast decency regulations either. So basically, you can say whatever you want, from wonderful four-letter words to sexually explicit content, if you're into that sort of thing. Now, copyright law does apply to podcasting, so you can't just steal people's stuff. Podcasters can copyright or license their own original work. And you need to remember that slander and libel laws apply too, so don't say anything you wouldn't repeat in front of a judge. So we'll cover legal in a later podcast. So people ask me, Chuck, why should I do a podcast? Well, I wrote a book called Extreme Marketing that shows that specialists in their field are exponentially more successful than their peers or laymen. Now, a podcast can elevate you to a specialist because you're a radio host now. You're a star. You're doing something that most other people in your field are afraid to do or won't do or don't have the time to do. You're putting your money where your mouth is, literally. When you advertise that you're the guy or gal who has a radio show about your topic, you've just become an influencer. Your target audience will be impressed. And that's one more reason to support your business or cause over someone else's. Now, a 1-hour podcast gives you the opportunity to tell your story the way that you want to tell it. So you're not going to get rushed through like if you're on a real radio show and try to get to the next Britney Spears song. They're going to give you time. You're going to give yourself time to really tell your story the way it's meant to be told. And rather than a short 3-minute sales spiel, a podcast gives you the ability to spread your message in a way that invokes emotion, creating a consumer or business need or want. That's how it works. You've got to get a mental connection, an emotional connection with your listeners or potential customers. And you can provide a long, lengthy call to action and ask for that lead, sale, or donation multiple times in your podcast. And then you can also share that podcast or your video podcast, we'll talk about later, on your website. You're a rock star. Now, unlike broadcast radio or broadcast television, you've got full creative control on your podcast. You set the schedule. You record it when you want to. You set the topics. You talk about whatever you want. You are the boss. No one's going to stand behind you and yell at you, hey, mention something or talk about this topic. This is all entirely your baby. If you're not an experienced radio host, that's really no problem either, because WDN, it's World Domination Network Podcasting, can help provide a director or a co-host that will guide your show smoothly. And there's always editing, which you can't do on live radio. If there's awkward pauses or something you want to say, chop it out. You don't have to do a podcast live. Most people don't. You can do them live if you want to. And if you can do it, you should do it because people dig live podcasts. But you can always pre-record them and then upload them when they're perfectly edited the way that you want it to go out. Broadcast radio, you got one shot because you're live on the air, man. If you mess that up, it's game over. Plus, now that you've got your own radio show, you can sell sponsorships or advertisements and actually make money. Many industries have trade associations or groups that provide sponsorship opportunities to their vendors. This is real money that you can use to build your business by mentioning a brand or a cause in your podcast. Who should do a podcast? Well, anybody with a story to tell. We've had doctors, lawyers, authors, singers, musicians, designers, hairstylists, chefs, business owners, real estate agents, rocket scientists, comedians, and a myriad of others on our radio show. And all of them got to tell their stories in depth and free of boundaries. Now, our producers know what questions to ask to bring out those hidden gems that will help promote you the best way possible. And I'm sure you can figure a lot of that stuff out too. Right? It's your baby. You can do whatever you want with it. People ask me, well, who's going to listen to my podcast? World Domination Network distributes its RSS podcast feed. You need an RSS podcast feed, and we'll talk about that in the distribution podcast via Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and a dozen other media outlets that allow listeners to search for and listen to podcasts with topics that interest them. And for a modest annual fee, you can sign up for your own professional Spreaker account and just do it yourself. It's a little work, but it's not insurmountable. If you've already got a large social media following, all you need to do is share the news about your podcast and watch your popularity soar. WDN adds value to its podcasters by sharing all of its broadcasts via our own social media channels with several thousand established followers and listeners. Think of it like a kickstart while you're building your own following. You can use us for a while and then take off on your own. We don't care. As long as you get started, that's what we want you to do. We want you to succeed. So what do you say on a podcast? This is stupid simple. All you have to do is pretend that you're talking with a group of new friends or old friends. Of course, you don't want to talk about things you wouldn't talk about and want your wife to find out about. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying. But many new podcasters and broadcasters aren't exactly sure what to say and how to say it. For many beginners, it can kind of be awkward. An established broadcaster like World Domination Network offers directors and co-hosts again that will help you learn how to lead a conversation. And we also offer content development for a few extra bucks. Our producers can outline and script your shows to help guide you along. Yeah, you could have a script for your show if we want to. We use them sometimes when we don't know what we're talking about. But we know pretty much everything, so we don't need them too much. I'm just kidding about that. And so this can help guide your initial podcast so they sound interesting and informative. Think of it like training wheels. Get your script to get you started, and once you get the flow, you dump the training wheels, and you're good to go on your own. For more on content, listen to Podcasting 102 Content, and that'll help explain show prep and that sort of thing. So this is Podcasting 101, basically an introduction to podcasting. Should you do it? Yes. Who can do it? Anybody. Will you do it? You darn well better if you got through this whole podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure you check out WDNpodcast.com for the entire series of podcasting seminars and podcasts themselves, the Podcasting Podcast. Say that real fast 4 or 5 times. And we've got information about our production services and our distribution and all the podcasts that we produce on WDNpodcast.com. My name is Chuck Fresh. Thanks for listening. Check out Podcasting 102 Content coming up next.